My son hit me 20 times while his wife smiled. I stayed still. I swallowed blood, not words. They thought I was weak, but they mistook silence for surrender. Welcome to Reddit Toxic Family Telltales channel. New episode every day. This is a story I never thought I'd have to tell. My own son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, decided one day that his strength made him king of the very house I built with my own 2 hands. One evening, right there in front of his wife, he raised his hand against me. Not once, not twice, but 20 times. Each strike landed with a sickening sound. Her smirk followed every single one. That quiet, cruel laugh, like she was watching some kind of joke instead of watching her husband beat his father. I didn't say a word. I counted. 1, 2, all the way to 20. My face burned, but inside, everything went cold. He thought he'd broken me. He didn't realize. I still held the deed to that house. But before I tell you what I did, tell me, where are you watching from? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe. 'Cause this one still echoes in my chest. I remember the beginning so clearly. My son was just a little kid with scraped knees and big dreams, chasing a ball down the street, looking up at me like I could build the whole world if I wanted to. And maybe back then I could. I taught him everything I knew, how to swing a hammer without splitting the wood, how to measure straight, how to make 2 edges meet flush. We built small things together, birdhouses, stools, shelves. I'd watch his tiny hands gripping the hammer, tongue sticking out in concentration. When he finally drove a nail in straight, he'd grin like he'd conquered the world. Those were the moments I thought would shape him, teach him respect for effort, for sacrifice. I truly believed I was raising a man who'd honor hard work the way I did. Years later, when he was grown, I helped him get his house. The bank needed someone with history, someone trustworthy, someone who could vouch for him. That was me. I signed my name with pride. I worked double shifts, patched my old boots when they split open in the winter, skipped meals so my family could eat better than I did. When the mortgage was approved, my hands were cracked but steady. I was proud. I was proud to see him with a roof over his head, proud to give him what I never had. That house wasn't just wood and walls. It was years of my labor, sweat that stained the soil and blood from every nail and splinter. It was my gift, a father's gift. For years, when I'd pass by and see the lights glowing through the windows, my heart felt full. I tell myself, my son's safe. My son's building a life. When I saw him mowing the lawn, I thought, he's steady. Responsible. When I saw his wife standing at the door with a smile, I thought, he's happy. I thought gratitude was buried somewhere deep in his chest, even if he never said the words. But gratitude fades fast when pride takes root. Over time, I watched him change. The house, the gift I gave, became something else. He started talking as if it had always been his. As if I'd never lifted a single beam. My name on those papers meant nothing to him anymore. The thankfulness I once imagined in him hardened into arrogance, and that arrogance turned to cruelty. Still, I stayed quiet. That's what fathers do, right? We hope. We excuse. We wait for the good we once saw in our children to come back. I told myself he was just proud, just figuring life out. I told myself time would soften him. But time only sharpened the edges. My patience turned into a noose around my own neck. And then came that night. The night my silence was mistaken for weakness. Started small, the way these things always do. Words. Little jabs tossed across the dinner table like stones. His wife laughed with every insult. She poured his drink, her eyes bright with mischief, and that laughter made him bolder. Old man, he called me. Dead weight. I sat there, my plate untouched, my hands folded tight in my lap. I told myself to breathe. Stay calm. But then he shoved me. Just enough to make me stumble back in my chair. His wife laughed again, that sharp, ugly sound, and that's when he did it. First slap came out of nowhere. Sharp. Loud. My cheek burned instantly. Before I could react, another one. Harder this time. Not just pain, but humiliation. His wife covered her mouth like she was shocked, but her eyes were gleaming. He looked around, proud of himself. Like striking his father made him a man. Count grew. 3, 4, 5. Each one landed with a word: useless, weak, pathetic. 6, 7, 8. I could feel my ears ringing, my face swelling, but I refused to cry. I wouldn't give them that. 9, 10, 11. The room spun. Not from the force, but from the shame. 12, 13, 14. My son's hand grew tired before his pride did. 15, 16, 17. My breath came in short bursts. 18, 19, 20. And then silence. For one terrible second, all you could hear was the sound of my breathing. Then his wife clapped, actually clapped, like it was a performance worth applauding. I sat there, tasting blood. I swallowed it down, straightened my back, folded my hands again, and looked at no one. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't even stand until I was ready. They thought my silence meant defeat, that I was beaten. But in that stillness, something inside me changed. Because what they couldn't see, what they'll never understand, is that every slap wasn't just against my skin. It was against every nail I drove, every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, every sacrifice I ever made for him. And when the 20th slap fell, I finally stood up. No anger in my voice. No threats. Just one long, cold look. I nodded once and walked out the door. No shouting. No begging. Just silence. But in that silence, something was born, a decision that would change everything. The slaps ended that night, but the shame didn't. Bruises heal. Swelling fades. But humiliation? That lingers. Crawls under your skin and makes a home there. You wake up, you wash your face, you try to move on, but it's still there, whispering in your ear, following you down every street. The next morning, I stepped outside and the whole world seemed to know. Neighbors stood on their porches, pretending to sweep or check the mail. Their eyes darted toward me, then away just as fast. Some shook their heads. Others whispered behind their hands. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. The sound of my disgrace had spread faster than the morning wind. I pulled my old coat tighter, not because I was cold, but because I felt naked. Exposed. And then I learned why. His wife, she made sure of it. She had her phone out that night, filming, smiling into the camera like it was a party. A slap here, a laugh there, a caption dripping with mockery. Respect your elders? Not in this house, she'd written, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Her friends found it hilarious. By sunrise, more people had seen that video than I'd care to imagine. The house I'd built with my sweat and pride had turned into a stage for my humiliation. Once that home had been my pride. Now it was my prison. The same walls that had sheltered me now pressed down like they were closing in. Every brick mocked me. Every corner whispered what I'd lost. Even the roof seemed to sag with the weight of my shame. The neighbors stopped waving. Friends stopped calling. Even family spoke to me differently, their voices softer, heavy with pity. Their eyes wouldn't meet mine. It wasn't the beating that broke me. It was the knowing that everyone else knew. That what should have never happened at all had become a story passed around for entertainment. I'd hear kids whisper when I walked by. Adults lowering their voices when I came near. The sting of his hand was gone, but the sting of those whispers that stayed fresh, cutting deeper every time. I wasn't Dad anymore. I wasn't the man who built or sacrificed. I was that old fool, the one who got slapped 20 times by his own son. That was my new title. That was my legacy. Inside, it was even worse. He walked through the house like nothing had happened. His wife floated behind him, smiling, humming, brushing past me as if I were just part of the furniture. They laughed together in the kitchen, the same kitchen I built. The sound of their laughter filled the halls, bouncing off the walls like cruel little echoes. They turned my pain into their punchline. My humiliation into their story. Their laughter was louder than any storm outside. And that house, the one I gave him, turned on me. It wasn't home anymore. It was a monument to my foolishness. Proof that I had given too much. Trusted too blindly. Mistaken arrogance for strength. Days passed. The shame didn't shrink, it grew. Every glance, every whisper added another stone to my chest. But shame, as I came to learn, wears two faces. One is pain. The other is clarity. And as I carried the pain, the clarity began to form. They had turned my gift into a stage. My silence into a joke. My dignity into ashes. But there was one thing they'd forgotten. Papers. The deed. The title. The house my son strutted through like a king wasn't his. Not legally. Not on paper. It was still mine. Every beam, every nail, every inch of soil beneath it, still mine. He mocked me inside walls that I still owned. And as the world laughed, I started to plan. That night, when the house went quiet and their lights went out, I didn't sleep. I sat at the old wooden table, the one I'd built when I first moved in. A single lamp burned beside me, casting a soft yellow glow across the walls. The air was still, but inside me, something shifted. I reached under my bed and pulled out an old shoebox, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were pieces of my life, letters, receipts, fading photographs, and the documents that still tied me to this house. I spread them out across the table like cards in a game. My hands trembled, not with fear but with the weight of it all. And there it was. The title. The house my son bragged about. The house where he struck me. The house where his wife laughed. I stared at that paper for a long time. His name wasn't there. Mine was. The mortgage mine. The guarantee mine. Property mine. Those same hands he'd slapped, those were the hands that still owned every brick he walked on. I remembered the day I first signed those papers. I'd stood tall, proud, thinking I was securing his future. I thought I was building something for him to stand on. But staring at it now, I saw it differently. It wasn't a gift anymore. It was a chain. A chain he'd wrapped around my neck with every insult, every slap, every cruel laugh. But chains can break. And that night, I realized I was holding the key. I sat there for hours, the lamp throwing a lazy circle of yellow over the table while I traced every line on those pages with my eyes. Not skimming, I read like a man who feared a single missed clause could cost him everything. Every paragraph, every witness signature, every embossed stamp. I wanted the rules to be unmistakable. I wanted the truth to be written so plainly even laughter couldn't erase it. With each sentence I read, my pulse calmed a little. The law was blunt and deaf to mockery. It answered only to ink. The neighborhood might have been buzzing with their jokes, but the paper listened where they would not. I closed the shoebox, set the title on top, and laid my hand over it until I could feel my own heartbeat against the thin paper. For the first time since that night, power came back to me, not the hot, angry kind but the slow, steady sort that fills a cup drop by drop. They thought silence had made me small. They thought the slaps had finished the story. They were wrong. That title, that single sheet, was more dangerous than any raised fist. It was a tool I'd signed years ago with a different intention. Now, in the cold light of humiliation, it felt like ammunition. He had forgotten whose name was on the line that let him walk beneath that roof. He'd forgotten the winter boots patched and worn thin, the overtime shifts, the meals skipped so someone else could have comfort. He forgot who put his life on paper. I folded the deed carefully, slow, deliberate folds, like a man folding up the map to a life he no longer trusted. The lid of the shoebox closed with a soft click. I did not roar or stomp. There was no drama, no television show catharsis. My decision was granite cold, not a flare. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would act. Tomorrow I would remind him of what he had ignored. I thought about all the ways I could have reacted that night. I could have screamed. I could have stormed to a neighbor's house, made a scene, called the police, flashed bruises like a banner. But I'd learned something about noise. When you yell in a room full of people who already expect you to be weak, you only make their whispers louder. A man who shouts for respect often ends up sounding smaller when everyone else keeps talking. So I chose a different route. I chose silence that stings, the kind that lasts. Paper, I decided, cuts deeper than a slap when you know how to use it. They turned my home into a theater of cruelty. I would turn it back into a ledger of consequence. The house I'd once given as a blessing had become a stage for contempt. If they wanted to treat it like a circus, fine, I'd be the one to sell the tent. When night swallowed the street and the house finally quieted, I packed the shoebox back under my bed. The lamp went low. I lay awake, turning possibilities over like coins in my hand. Winter is quiet but relentless. It doesn't shout when it takes the color from a field. It simply arrives, and before you know it, there's nothing left but white. That's how I pictured my plan. Not a shout, but a creeping, undeniable truth that would leave no place untouched. I replayed the image I wanted to see. The look on his face when a key no longer fit, the baffled fury when lock after lock refused him. The confusion in his wife's eyes when strangers measured the floor she'd mocked. Furniture carried out, rooms rearranged, strangers walking where she once strutted, small, precise torments, not to break bone but to break arrogance. The hand that gives, I thought, can also be the one that takes. Morning found me before the sun. The world was a silvery hush. I put on the same coat he'd scoffed at, the one with the patched elbow that had kept me warm through more winters than I care to remember, and wiped the dust from my shoes. There's a kind of sound to resolve, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the soft swish of my coat, breath puffing into the cold air. Each step toward the lawyer's office felt like an instrument tuning up for a performance that had nothing to do with theatrics and everything to do with precision. Inside, the radiator hissed and filled the room with an honest, useless heat. The lawyer was a steady man I'd known for years. He didn't need the details of the story. He needed the facts. So I gave him the facts. I want to sell, I said simply, and slid the title across his desk. He read it, nodded, and the machinery of legality began, not with shouting but with the dry, relentless scratch of a pen. That scratching sound, forms being filled, boxes checked, clauses typed, was music to me. Where my son had used his fists, I used signatures. Where his wife had traded in ridicule, I traded in silence and procedure. We laid the sale out clean, a listing that left no crevice for second chances, contracts that would transfer ownership swiftly, clauses that would close the door and bolt it tight. No loopholes. No backdoors. When I spoke about what would happen to the proceeds, I didn't do it out of spite. I told the lawyer I wanted the money placed into a trust, not for me alone but for the people who had treated me with decency when my own blood would not. Caretakers, honest workers, neighbors who'd shown a hand instead of a finger. Let the spoils go to those who practiced respect, I thought. Let the rest learn what it feels like to lose a roof. Every signature I made felt like a handled hammer, controlled, deliberate, with force enough to shape but not to destroy beyond repair. I remembered teaching my boy how to swing and balance the way I'd shown him how to respect a tool's weight. Irony, perhaps, that I was now using a different kind of weight, the quiet heft of legal paper. When I left the office, the plan was set in motion. It wasn't a vendetta born of a momentary flare. It was a slow, measured correction for something that had been allowed to fester. The slaps had been given in a flash. My reply would be slow and thorough, winter again, creeping in to cover what arrogance had tried to claim. I walked back home with the shoebox tucked under my arm, the day just waking up. People said things in the street, voices falling away when they saw me. I kept my head down, each breath a cloud in the new air. I was no longer driven by the hot ache of shame. I was guided by the cool iron of resolve. And though my hands no longer shook, somewhere deep in my chest a quiet thing had hardened into certainty. Tomorrow when he came home, his keys would not fit. Tomorrow he would learn, not from jokes or from gossip, but from the unmistakable fact that the roof he'd stood under had a different name on the deed. By the time the last document was signed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, light. The lawyer rose, straightened the stack of papers, and said quietly, "It's done. Once the buyers move in, there's nothing he can do." Those words sank deep. Final. I thanked him, buttoned my old coat, and stepped out into the cold. The air bit at my cheeks, sharp and clean, the kind of cold that feels like truth. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't lifted a hand, but I had struck somewhere far deeper than flesh. I pictured my son at that very moment, sitting at his desk, laughing with coworkers, proud of his life. Maybe he was bragging again about his house, about how well things were going. He didn't know that, even as he smiled, strangers were walking through those rooms. They were opening closets, running fingers along the walls, imagining where their children would sleep. The home he'd claimed as his was already being measured, examined, and priced by people who would soon hold the keys. He had no idea the floor beneath him had already begun to shift. His fists couldn't undo my signature. His pride couldn't erase the stamp of the state. His laughter couldn't rewrite the law. The house was mine to give, and I had given it away. That evening, I sat once again at the same wooden table where I'd made my decision. The shoebox was empty now, the title gone, passed into the quiet hands of legality. My cheek still carried the faint shadow of his blows, but inside my chest there was something stronger. I had answered humiliation not with rage, but with permanence. He had marked my face. I had taken the ground from under his feet. The morning came soft, ordinary. He woke as he always did, stretched, kissed his wife on the cheek, laughed about something trivial. He didn't even glance at me. He didn't see the shift in the air. He stepped out the door, certain his world was untouchable. But while he worked, that world began to crumble. Cars started to arrive, one after another. The realtor. The movers. Strangers with clipboards, boxes, and gloves. They entered his home without hesitation. The house that had echoed with laughter now filled with the rustle of cardboard and the thud of footsteps. His wife appeared from the kitchen, confusion flashing into panic. "What's happening?" she snapped. The realtor handed her the papers, calm and professional. "This property has been sold. Please begin packing your things." I watched her face drain of color as she read words she didn't understand. Her voice rose, cracking. "Call my husband," she shouted, waving the paper like it was a weapon. But the men kept working, box after box, room after room. Tape hissed, furniture scraped, and the house began to hollow. She called him again and again, her voice splintering. He didn't answer. He couldn't stop what had already been set in motion. I stood quietly in the corner, hands clasped behind my back. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just watched the life they'd built on my back carried out piece by piece. Every box was a memory undone. Every rolled rug, every painting wrapped in paper was a lesson delivered. By noon, their laughter was gone, replaced by the steady rhythm of change. The living room was stripped bare, the shelves stood empty. Even the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the house itself exhaled relief. New voices filled the space, strangers talking about curtains, colors, furniture placement. The future moved in while the past sat trembling on the stairs. His wife hunched there, clutching her phone, whispering into it like prayer. I remembered that night. Her laughter. His hand. 20 slaps. And how certain they both had been that I was powerless. Yet here I stood, quiet, steady, while their empire turned to dust around them. When the last box left the door, I stepped outside. The realtor locked her car. The movers loaded their truck. His wife sat frozen by the threshold, her face buried in her hands. I passed her without a word. What was there to say? The house was gone. Sold while he worked. Taken from them as quietly as they had taken my dignity. That evening, I heard his car pull into the driveway. The slam of the door. The easy laughter still in his voice as he talked on the phone. Confidence of a man untouched by consequence. Then came the sound, the jingle of keys, the scrape of metal in the lock. Once. Twice. Confusion. He pushed harder. The door refused him. His wife opened it from inside. Her face said everything, pale, streaked with tears. She handed him the papers without a word. He stepped inside and stopped cold. The house was empty. The living room where he once boasted was bare. The dining table gone. Pictures gone. The echoes of his own laughter came back at him from the hollow walls. I heard his voice crack as he shouted, "Dad! Where are you? What did you do?" He stormed through the rooms, panic growing, rage boiling. Every door he opened, every corner he turned revealed the same truth. Nothing was his anymore. When he found me sitting in the kitchen, I didn't rise. I sat in the last remaining chair, my coat folded neatly in my lap. He stood before me, fists trembling. "What did you do?" he demanded. I didn't answer. I just pointed to the counter, to the stack of papers. He picked them up, eyes darting over the words, confusion turning to horror, then to something else, fear. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be." His wife leaned against the wall, sobbing quietly. "It's gone," she said. "The house, it's gone." He looked back at me, desperate. "Dad, you wouldn't." But I already had. His voice broke. His hands shook. He shouted about family, about blood, about rights, but the law had already spoken. His fists had no power here. His pride couldn't fight ink. His cruelty couldn't undo signatures. When the movers came to finish, he tried to block the door. They showed him the stamped papers. He stepped back, speechless, as strangers carried away the last pieces of his arrogance. I stood and put on my coat. As I walked past, our shoulders brushed, and for the first time he didn't look bigger than me. He just looked small. Side, I could hear his shouting fade into silence behind me. The house was gone, but the lesson remained. Words spread quickly, the same way it had when he hit me. Neighbors whispered again, but this time the whispers carried a different tone. "He got what he deserved," I heard one say. His friends vanished. His wife carried shame wherever she went. The laughter that once filled their home turned to silence that followed them everywhere. Even at work, he couldn't escape it. Men who once drank with him now laughed behind his back. His pride, once built on stolen strength, was hollow. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to say a word. The world was doing that for me. The same neighbors who once pitted me now nodded in quiet respect. A few even stopped to say, "You did right." They knew. Everyone knew. Balance had been restored. I left with nothing but my old coat and a small bag. Yet I felt lighter than I had in years. Behind me stood the house I built, no longer chained to my name, no longer stained by humiliation. Ahead of me stretched quiet streets, lined not with gossip but with understanding. The house still stands. Its bricks still hold. Its roof still keeps out the rain. But it no longer belongs to him, the man who thought fists could erase 30 years of sacrifice, or to the woman who laughed beside him. It belongs now to strangers who earned it with their own sweat. And that, I think, is justice. He gave me 20 slaps on his own floor. I sold those floors while he worked. He left me in silence, and I left him with it. That was my true revenge. Not rage. Not violence. Just silence, cold, steady, unshakable silence.
Thanks for watching. Today's train wreck is over, but tomorrow's ride is already on track. Subscribe so you don't miss it.